Vexthal's primary sensory appendages twitched uncomfortably as the same footage played for the 17th time on the curved holographic display. The diplomatic vessel, sleek, ornate, and completely unsuited for combat, blossomed into incandescent light against the void. 17 diplomats, 12 species, 1 unprovoked attack. Replay external sensor array 12. Vexthal ordered, voice steady despite the churning in their 4 digestive chambers. The AI complied silently. There, just before detonation, the distinctive energy signature of Kravac disruptor technology. This wasn't a malfunction or navigational accident, as the Kravac ambassador was already claiming. This was deliberate. This was war. Senior Communications Officer Vexthal, a voice chimed from the doorway. The Council requests your immediate presence. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Confederation buzzed with agitation. 200 representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations filled the tiered seating, their translator modules creating a background hum like angry insects. Elder Enzarek, the ancient Volari who had led the Confederation for 3 centuries, raised a gnarled limb for silence. The evidence confirms our fears, Elder Enzarek announced, voice amplified throughout the chamber. The diplomatic vessel Harmony of Worlds was destroyed by Kravac weaponry. There were no survivors. Vexthal stepped forward, clearing their throat sac awkwardly. Forgiveness, Elder, but that is not entirely accurate. Our long-range sensors detected a single escape pod ejected moments before detonation. It was recovered by the patrol ship Swift Current. There is 1 survivor, the human representative, Commander Elena Hayes. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Humans, the newcomers, barely 30 years since they'd achieved faster-than-light travel and already claiming a seat at the diplomatic table. Some found their rapid advancement impressive, others disturbing. The humans survived. Elder Enzarek's phosphorescent eyes blinked rapidly. What is her condition? Stable but unconscious, Vexthal replied. The Swift Current is returning her to the medical facility on Outpost 7. And what of Earth? Have they been informed? The transmission was sent as per protocol. We received acknowledgement 9 standard hours ago. The Zgitar military representative, a hulking figure with iridescent battle scales, made a dismissive gesture. The humans will undoubtedly withdraw from Confederation affairs now. They are untested in interstellar conflict. This tragedy will send them retreating to their solar system for another century. Vexthal hesitated. Actually, we received a response from their United Earth government 20 minutes ago. It was unusually brief. Elder Enzarek gestured for Vexthal to continue. The message reads, deploying the Aurora. Prepare to receive coordinates. Diplomatic credentials attached. That's all. The Aurora. Elder Enzarek repeated. Is this a diplomatic vessel? Vexthal's skin flushed a deep amber, a sign of discomfort among their species. No, Elder. According to our database, the Aurora is classified as a warship. Their first, and apparently only interstellar combat vessel. The chamber erupted in noise. A single warship against the Kravac battle fleets. It was absurd. Suicidal. The humans were either incredibly brave or profoundly ignorant of galactic warfare. I've taken the liberty of analyzing the technical specifications they transmitted. Vexthal continued when order was restored. The Aurora appears unremarkable by our standards, approximately 1/8 the size of a Confederation cruiser, with conventional armaments. So they send a token force. The Zgitar representative rumbled, a symbolic gesture before they withdraw. Vexthal's secondary appendages twitched, a gesture unnoticed by most species, but recognized by the Elder Volari as significant. You have concerns, Communications Officer, Elder Enzarek inquired. The specifications contain anomalies. Elder, power readings that don't align with vessel size. Alloys we can't identify. And there's a curious phrase in their technical documentation that our translators struggled with. They classify the Aurora as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Elder Enzerek's ancient eyes narrowed. Explain this term. It's a human idiom, Vexthal replied. It refers to something dangerous disguised as something harmless. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. The newcomers to the Galactic stage weren't retreating. They were hunting. The Aurora slipped into real space with none of the customary fanfare that accompanied Confederation vessels. No ceremonial communication bursts. No formal declarations of identity and purpose. Just the abrupt appearance of a ship that seemed, at first glance, unremarkable. Vexthal, now appointed official liaison to the human vessel, watched from the observation deck of Outpost 7 as the ship approached. By Confederation standards, it was indeed modest. A sleek charcoal-gray hull approximately 300 meters in length, lacking the ornate external architecture that distinguished the vessels of more established species. Curious design, remarked Administrator Pelvos, who had joined Vexthal at the viewport. No visible weapon emplacements. Minimal sensor arrays. One might mistake it for a merchant vessel. One might, Vexthal agreed, noting how the ship moved with peculiar precision, its approach vector maintaining perfect alignment with the station's main docking port. Not a single corrective thrust. No navigational adjustments. As if the helmsman could calculate microscopic gravitational variables in their head. The welcoming delegation assembled in Docking Bay 12 included representatives from 8 Confederation species. Vexthal stood at the forefront, traditional greeting medallion suspended from their neck ridge. The airlock cycled, pressure equalized, and the doors parted with a soft hiss. Captain Malcolm Reed stepped through first, a compact human with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room in seconds. 6 officers followed, each wearing identical charcoal uniforms, bearing only small rank insignia, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial dress of Confederation military welcomes. On behalf of the Galactic Confederation, I extend formal greetings, Vexthal began, touching the medallion in the ritual 3-point pattern. Thank you, Reed replied simply, bypassing the traditional 20-minute exchange of diplomatic pleasantries. I understand you've been appointed as our liaison. I look forward to working with you, Officer Vexthal. The human already knew their name and rank. Interesting. The formal tour of the station proceeded awkwardly, with the human showing polite but minimal interest in its architectural achievements and ceremonial halls. Only when they reached the tactical center did Reed's team engage fully, asking pointed questions about Kravak fleet movements and defensive capabilities that left the station commander flustered. Perhaps, Vexthal suggested diplomatically, our guests would prefer to settle into their quarters before the official reception. Reed nodded. Or perhaps we could offer a reciprocal tour of the Aurora. We travel light. No ceremonies required. 3 hours later, Vexthal's perception of humanity underwent a seismic shift. The Aurora's interior belied its unremarkable exterior. No grand halls. No ornamental displays. Every centimeter served a tactical purpose. The bridge, compact, circular, illuminated by subdued red lighting, hummed with quiet efficiency. Crew members acknowledged their captain, not with salutes but with brief nods, their focus unbroken. Our point defense system, explained Lieutenant Commander Zara Okafor, a tall human with intricate patterns shaved into her dark hair, gesturing to a holographic display. 32 independent targeting computers networked through a quantum processor, response time of approximately 0.06 seconds. Impressive, Vexthal offered. Though the Skitar defense systems claimed 0.08, Okafor's smile didn't reach her eyes. We had to test the system on our approach. Small asteroid field. Nothing significant. Later, reviewing the sensor logs in private, Vexthal discovered the small asteroid field had been a Kravak minefield. Experimental proximity devices that had claimed 3 Confederation scout ships in recent months. The Aurora had navigated through without triggering a single detonation. At the reception that evening, Reed stood before the assembled Confederation officials, a small figure among the diverse assemblage of galactic representatives. "We appreciate your welcome," the captain began without preamble. "But let's dispense with diplomatic theater. We've studied every recorded engagement between your forces and the Kravak. Your ships are magnificent, your traditions admirable, but your tactics are predictable, and predictability gets people killed." The Skitar Admiral's scales flushed deep crimson. "You dare." "We dare because we must," Reed continued calmly. "Earth doesn't have the luxury of millennia-old fleet traditions or the resources for massive warships. What we have is experience, different experience. We've had to become very good at fighting wars with limited resources against superior forces. Now, would you like to hear our proposal, or shall we continue exchanging pleasantries while the Kravak prepare their next attack?" Silence fell across the reception hall. Then, astonishingly, Elder Enzarek began to laugh, a wheezing sound like escaping steam. "Perhaps," the ancient Volari remarked, "we should listen to what our young friends have to say." The Confederation War Room was a marvel of engineering, a perfect sphere suspended within the central spire of Outpost 7, its interior surfaces composed entirely of holographic projectors. As the highest-ranking military leaders from 17 species assembled, the room transformed into a three-dimensional map of the disputed sector, Kravak fleet positions displayed as pulsing red clusters. Vexthal stood at the chamber's periphery, technically present only to facilitate communication, but in reality, watching the humans with increasing fascination. Admiral Jektar, Supreme Commander of Confederation Forces, gestured with a scaled appendage at the holographic display. "The Kravak have established a defensive perimeter along these coordinates. Our strategy is to mass our heavy cruisers here." 7 blue icons shifted position and execute a direct frontal assault, while our lighter vessels perform a flanking maneuver through the Kaltorian Nebula. The assembled commanders nodded in agreement. It was a textbook Confederation approach, overwhelming force applied according to time-honored traditions of space combat. Captain Reed cleared his throat. The small sound somehow cut through the ambient hum of the chamber. "Permission to offer an alternative perspective, Admiral." Jektar's neck frills extended slightly, a sign of irritation. "The strategy has been approved by the Confederation Military Council, Captain. But we welcome observations from our human allies." Reed stepped forward, his movements economical. "Lieutenant Commander Okafor, if you would." The tactical officer interfaced her personal device with the holographic system. The display flickered, then transformed. The same star map appeared, but now layered with dozens of new data points, supply routes, communication relays, planetary allegiances, gravitational anomalies. "You're facing an enemy that studied your tactics for centuries," Reed began, voice level. "Every time you've engaged the Kravak with a frontal assault, they've withdrawn precisely 14.3 light minutes before executing a counterattack against your flanking forces." Admiral Jektar's scales darkened. "Our records don't indicate." "Because you classify those as separate engagements," Okafor interjected. "We analyzed the pattern across 142 battles over the past 70 years. It's consistent." Reed gestured, and the simulation began to run, showing the proposed Confederation attack, followed by the predicted Kravak response. The blue icons representing flanking vessels winked out one by one. "The Kravak have positioned 3 cloaked drone carriers here, and here," Reed continued, indicating points that appeared empty on the Confederation display. "They're expecting your maneuver because you've used the same approach in 67% of major engagements." Silence fell across the war room. Vexthal noticed the human officers maintained neutral expressions, not triumphant, not challenging, simply presenting information as fact. "And what would you propose instead, Captain?" Elder Enzarek inquired from his observer's position. Reed nodded to Okafor, who initiated a new simulation, a 3-pronged approach. First, a small, fast-moving strike team disables their communication relays here and here. Then, rather than engaging their fleet directly, we target these supply depots. Finally, and most importantly, we broadcast this message on all Kravac frequencies. The holographic display showed a series of transmission codes. "What is this?" demanded Admiral Zhiktar. "Internal communications we intercepted between Kravac High Command and their fleet captains," Reed explained. "Orders to sacrifice 3 outlying colonies if necessary to secure victory. Colonies whose populations have been told they're being protected at all costs." A Meridian commander with crystalline features chimed in. "You propose psychological warfare." "We propose using every advantage available," Reed replied. "The Kravac command structure relies on absolute loyalty. Create doubt in that loyalty, and their entire strategy falters." Admiral Zhiktar's voice rose. "This is not how the Confederation conducts warfare. There are protocols, traditions that have served us for millennia." "And how well have those traditions served you against the Kravac?" Reed asked quietly. The room erupted in multiple languages, translator modules struggling to keep pace with the overlapping voices. Elder Enzarek raised a gnarled hand for silence. "Captain Reed," the ancient Folari inquired, "what gives your species the confidence to question methods refined over thousands of years of interstellar conflict?" Reed exchanged glances with his officers, then nodded to Okafor once more. The holographic display shifted again, now showing a blue-green planet. "This is Earth, 1939 to 1945 by our calendar," he said softly. What followed stunned the chamber into silence. A global conflict unfolded before them. Battles across oceans, land masses, and skies, with death tolls that made even veteran commanders flinch. "This is one of thousands of wars humans fought against each other before we achieved unity," Reed continued. "More beings died in this single conflict than in all Confederation Kravac engagements combined. We don't claim moral superiority, Admiral. Quite the opposite. We simply offer the hard-earned wisdom of a species that had to become very good at warfare to survive." Elder Enzarek's ancient eyes studied the human captain for several long moments. "Perhaps," the elder finally said, "it is time for new approaches." The Aurora hung in space like a predator at rest, deceptively still, yet coiled with potential energy. Vexthal's shuttle approached the human vessel 20 hours after the contentious War Council, where Reed's tactical proposal had ultimately been approved by the narrowest margin in Confederation history. "Shuttle KL-19 requesting permission to dock," the pilot transmitted. "Permission granted," came the immediate response. "Bay 2 is prepared for your arrival." No formal greeting protocols. No ceremonial language. Vexthal was beginning to understand that human efficiency wasn't rudeness. It was simply their default state when preparing for conflict. Commander Elena Hayes met Vexthal at the airlock. The human diplomat had recovered remarkably quickly from her injuries, though a healing laceration still traced her left temple. Her eyes held the haunted look Vexthal had seen in too many survivors. "Officer Vexthal," she greeted with a small nod. "Captain Reed is currently in the combat simulator. He asked me to escort you there." The corridors of the Aurora were narrow by Confederation standards, utilitarian and populated by crew members who moved with purpose. None wore ceremonial dress or decorative insignia beyond simple rank markers. "We deploy in 6 hours," Hayes explained as they walked. "Everyone's making final preparations." "Your crew appears remarkably calm given the circumstances," Vexthal observed. Hayes' expression softened slightly. "This isn't our first dangerous mission. Just our first against non-human opponents." The combat simulator occupied what would have been a grand assembly hall on a Confederation vessel. Instead, 24 crew members stood arranged in a rough circle around a central holographic projection, while Captain Reed paced between them, occasionally pausing to adjust the simulation. "The Kravac heavy cruisers will attempt to bracket us here and here," he was saying as Vexthal entered. "Standard pincer movement. Tactical options. Conventional response would be to reverse thrust and retreat to minimum weapons range, Okafor replied. They'll be expecting that. I suggest instead we accelerate directly at the lead vessel, execute a 90-degree pitch at 2 kilometers, skim their dorsal shields, and fire all ventral batteries as we pass. In simulacrum, that yields a 70% survival probability. The ship's AI added in a neutral tone. Not good enough, Reed stated flatly. Alternatives. We could jettison probe casings packed with reactive materials, suggested a young engineer. Proximity detonation creates a sensor ghost that might confuse their targeting systems long enough for a vertical escape vector. The exchange continued, crew members offering increasingly creative solutions while Reed calmly assessed each one. What struck Vexthal was the absence of deference to rank. Ideas came from ensigns as readily as senior officers, evaluated purely on merit. That's enough for now, Reed finally announced. Everyone to your stations. Final preparations. We launch in 5 hours, 46 minutes. As the crew dispersed, Reed turned to Vexthal. Apologies for the delay, officer. I hope Commander Hayes has made you comfortable. Quite, Vexthal assured him. Though I admit to curiosity about your simulator. The situations you were rehearsing. Worst-case scenarios, Reed explained, leading the way toward the bridge. We try to prepare for every possible failure, including your own destruction. Reed's expression remained neutral. Especially that. If we're going to die, we intend to make our deaths tactically meaningful. The human's matter-of-fact tone chilled Vexthal's thermal chambers. You speak of death very practically. It's the reality of warfare, Reed replied. Something your people seem to have forgotten, fighting their ritualized battles with predetermined maneuvers. In the ship's medical bay, Vexthal observed the chief surgeon demonstrating emergency procedures to her team, using simulations that made the Confederation medical officers stationed nearby visibly uncomfortable. Arterial pressure won't respond to standard sealant if you're dealing with radiation damage, she explained, hands moving with precise efficiency. You'll need to improvise a pressure cuff from whatever's available. In engineering, a heated debate erupted between two specialists about modifying the shield harmonics. The math doesn't support it, the taller one insisted. The math is based on theoretical models. His colleague countered. I'm telling you, if we modulate the frequency to match their targeting systems, we can create a temporary blind spot. Neither apologized when Vexthal entered, nor did they moderate their language in the presence of an official visitor. The argument continued until they reached a solution through a combination of calculations and creative profanity. When Vexthal finally asked Hayes directly why humans became so proficient at warfare, the commander's response was unexpectedly vulnerable. We never wanted to be good at this, she said quietly, looking out at the stars from the observation deck. But on Earth, species that couldn't adapt to new threats didn't survive. We're the descendants of those who did, carrying their hard-won wisdom in our DNA. She turned to face Vexthal, her expression solemn. The Kravak think they're facing a primitive species with one small warship. What they're actually facing is the distilled experience of countless generations who mastered the art of survival against overwhelming odds. For the first time since the diplomatic massacre, Vexthal felt something unexpected. Hope. Vexthal stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship Eternal Vigilance, watching as the massive fleet arranged itself into the traditional crescent formation. 300 vessels, from nimble corvettes to lumbering dreadnoughts, maneuvered with choreographed precision. The Aurora had been assigned to the fleet's rear guard, tactically irrelevant, and safely distant from primary engagement zones. Admiral Jhtar had accepted the human intelligence regarding Kravak positions, but remained skeptical of their unconventional tactics. The humans will observe proper combat procedures from a respectful distance, the Admiral had declared during the final briefing. Their vessel is unsuited for frontline engagement. Vexthal, having chosen to remain with the main fleet rather than aboard the Aurora, now monitored communications as the imposing armada approached the Kravak defensive line, a formation of 67 warships protecting the strategic Forland system. All vessels maintained position. Admiral Shakhtar's voice resonated through the command channel. "Prepare for long-range artillery barrage on my mark." The tactical display showed the precise, geometric patterns of Confederation ships, each class positioned according to centuries of doctrine, a grand spatial chessboard awaiting the first move. The first sign that plans had gone awry came not as weapons fire, but as silence. Communication relays from the fleet's forward scouts abruptly terminated. "Contact lost with reconnaissance squadron," reported the communications officer, their bioluminescent appendages flashing with alarm patterns. Before Admiral Shakhtar could respond, space itself seemed to ripple. Where sensors had shown empty void, 34 Kravak vessels materialized, directly within the Confederation formation. "Ambush." The tactical officer's voice rose sharply. "They've developed a new cloaking technology." The meticulously arranged Confederation fleet dissolved into chaos as Kravak vessels struck from inside their defensive perimeter. The elegant crescent formation, designed for coordinated long-range exchanges, became a liability in close-quarters combat. "All vessels, defensive protocols." Admiral Shakhtar commanded, but the damage was spreading. 3 Confederation cruisers erupted into expanding clouds of debris before they could even engage their shields. Amid the chaos, a single communication cut through the overlapping distress calls. "This is Captain Reed of the Aurora requesting permission to engage." Admiral Shakhtar's scales flushed deep crimson. "Stay in your assigned position, human. Try not to get yourselves killed." Vexthal watched as the Aurora's indicator on the tactical display began to move, not retreating as ordered, but accelerating directly toward the heart of the battle. "Aurora, you are violating direct orders," Admiral Shakhtar barked. "With respect, Admiral," Reed's calm voice replied, "we're pursuing tactical opportunity. Suggest you focus your attention on Quadrant 7. What followed left the bridge crew of the Eternal Vigilance in stunned silence. The Aurora moved like no vessel they had ever tracked, executing maneuvers that should have torn a ship apart. Where Confederation vessels relied on predictable patterns of advance and retreat, the human ship darted between enemy formations, its trajectory a jagged, unpredictable line across the tactical display. Most baffling were the moments when the Aurora seemed to make tactical errors, accelerating toward incoming missiles, briefly powering down shields in the midst of battle, positioning itself directly between 2 Kravak destroyers. Yet each apparent mistake revealed itself as deliberate strategy. The missiles, unable to adjust to the ship's sudden vector changes, collided with their launchers. The momentary shield drops allowed the Aurora to fire through its own defensive perimeter. The position between enemy vessels forced them to calculate weapons trajectories that wouldn't hit their own ships. "Impossible," muttered the Shakhtar weapons officer. Their inertial compensators should have failed during that last maneuver. When 3 Kravak destroyers finally coordinated their attack on the irritating human vessel, Vexthal could barely watch. The Aurora, already showing signs of damage with fluctuating power signatures, suddenly went dark, all systems shutting down simultaneously. "They've been destroyed," Admiral Shakhtar declared, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "No," Vexthal countered, pointing to the sensor readings. "They've powered down completely. Not even emergency systems are running." The Kravak vessels converged on the apparently dead ship, closing to point-blank range to confirm the kill. At precisely that moment, the Aurora erupted back to life, all weapons systems firing simultaneously at carefully calculated weak points in the enemy ship's armor. 2 Kravak destroyers listed immediately, venting atmosphere and drive plasma. The third managed to retreat, but its command section had been surgically removed by focused beam weapons. The engagement lasted 27 minutes. When it ended, the Kravak forces were in full retreat, leaving behind 17 destroyed vessels. The Confederation had lost 9 ships and suffered damage to 23 others. The Aurora, showing significant external scaring, but with all systems operational, took up station-keeping formation alongside the flagship. Aurora to eternal vigilance. Reed's voice came through, still measured despite the chaos they'd just survived. We've transmitted the tactical data from our engagement. You'll find the Kravac vessels have a structural vulnerability, where their shield generators connect to the main power distribution network. Targeting those junctions with precisely calibrated energy weapons yields a 74% higher damage efficiency. Admiral Jiktar stared at the tactical display, scales now pale with shock. How did you determine this? We observed it during the battle. Reed replied simply. Request permission to pursue retreating vessels. The Admiral looked to Elder Enzrek, who had observed the entire engagement in silence. Permission granted, Aurora. The Elder Valeri responded before Jiktar could object. And Captain Reed. The Confederation formally requests any additional tactical insights you might care to share. You realize this is likely a one-way mission, Captain Reed remarked, his tone conversational as he studied the star chart projected above the tactical table. Vexthal's 4 hearts accelerated slightly. I am aware of the statistical probabilities, Captain. The human's eyes, gray as spacecraft alloy, met Vexthal's compound gaze. Yet you volunteered to remain aboard when we break from the main fleet. I did, Vexthal confirmed. Reed nodded once, apparently satisfied, and returned his attention to the chart. The Aurora's bridge hummed with quiet activity as the crew prepared for their most audacious mission yet, infiltrating Kravac territory to disrupt supply lines, while the Confederation fleet engaged the main armada. After the ship's performance in the initial battle, even Admiral Jiktar had been unable to deny the effectiveness of human combat tactics. The Aurora had been granted operational autonomy, unprecedented for a non-Confederation vessel. Our primary insertion point will be through the Kalebiu pulsar field, Lieutenant Commander Okafor explained, highlighting a region of space that glowed angry red on the chart. Conventional wisdom says it's impassable. Conventional wisdom isn't wrong, Reed noted. It is impassable for ships with traditional shield configurations and mass distributions. The Aurora isn't a traditional ship, Hayes added with the ghost of a smile. 20 hours later, Vexthal understood exactly what they meant. The pulsar field bombarded the ship with radiation levels that would have overloaded standard Confederation shields within minutes. The Aurora, however, executed a complex series of rolling maneuvers, its modified shields flickering in patterns that seemed to harmonize with the pulsar emissions. We're modulating our shield frequency to match the pulsar's rotation, Okafor explained, noting Vexthal's fascination with the procedure, essentially riding the wave instead of fighting it. The technique worked. The Aurora emerged deep within Kravac space, undetected and with all systems functional. What followed was unlike any military campaign Vexthal had witnessed in 3 decades of Confederation service. The humans didn't target the obvious military installations that dominated Kravac strategic planning. Instead, they struck at infrastructure nodes, communication hubs, and, most surprisingly, cultural monuments. The Monument of Inevitable Victory is a symbolic target, not a military one. Vexthal objected as Reed selected it for their 3rd strike. Exactly, the captain replied. The Kravac leadership has built a narrative of invincibility. Each monument we destroy erodes that narrative. The Aurora appeared without warning above a Kravac colony world, disabled its orbital defenses with surgical precision, and fired a single concentrated beam that reduced the 1,000-year-old monument to molten slag. Before defensive forces could respond, the ship vanished back into the void. At a supply depot orbiting a gas giant, they employed a different approach. Rather than destroying the facility, they transmitted intercepted communications between Kravac High Command and local administrators, communications revealing that the latter had been skimming resources and blaming shortfalls on Confederation raids. We could simply destroy their stockpiles, Vexthal observed. We could, Hayes agreed, But this way, they'll destroy themselves from within. The Kravak leadership executes administrators found guilty of resource theft. After each raid, they left survivors, not from mercy, but by design. Survivors spread stories. Stories became rumors. Rumors became fear. Intercepted Kravak communications soon confirmed the effectiveness of this approach. Reports mentioned a ghost ship that appeared without warning and struck with terrifying precision. Lower-ranking Kravak began questioning their commander's ability to protect them. Some colonial outposts even surrendered to modest Confederation forces rather than risk the attention of the human vessel. In human warfare, Hayes explained during a rare quiet moment, as they drifted in the shadow of a rogue planet, conducting repairs to minor battle damage. Breaking the enemy's will to fight is often more effective than breaking their ability to fight. This approach seems personal, Vexthal observed. It is. Reed acknowledged. The Kravak attacked a diplomatic vessel. They murdered our representatives and those of 11 other species. This isn't just tactical, it's justice. On their 7th day behind enemy lines, the Aurora's sensors detected an unexpected energy signature, massive and distinctive. Flagship configuration, Okafor reported, her usual calm demeanor showing the first cracks of concern. The inevitable dominance has joined the hunt. The tactical display showed a vessel nearly 20 times the Aurora's mass, surrounded by a protection fleet of 30 smaller craft. Kivash himself, Reed murmured, referring to the Kravak Supreme Commander. He's taken personal command of the pursuit. That's exactly what we wanted, Hayes pointed out. Resources diverted from the main conflict. At considerable cost to us, Reed countered, studying the display. The Aurora had accumulated significant damage over the past week. Scorched hull plates, overtaxed engines, dwindling ammunition. We've achieved our primary objective. We could withdraw through the Nilaran corridor and rendezvous with Confederation forces. The bridge fell silent as the crew awaited the captain's decision. Vexthal noticed how they watched Reed, not with blind obedience or fear, but with absolute trust. Finally, the captain straightened, a subtle change coming over his posture. Tactical analysis of the inevitable dominance, he requested. I want to know every weakness, every blind spot, every vulnerability in its defense grid. Captain, Okafor questioned. Reed's expression hardened into something Vexthal hadn't seen before, something ancient and resolute. If Kivash wants to hunt the Aurora so badly, he said quietly, let's give him his chance. The Aurora's mess hall, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, had become the impromptu gathering place for off-duty crew members during their final approach to the Kravak flagship. Vexthal observed from the doorway as humans sat in small groups, their conversations a mix of technical discussions and surprising levity given the circumstances. They know the statistical probability of survival is below 20%. Vexthal commented quietly to Commander Hayes, who stood beside them. Yet they seem unconcerned. Hayes' expression softened with something like fondness as she watched her crew. Not unconcerned, just accepting. Humans have always found comfort in shared experience before battle. At a table near the center of the room, an older officer had begun speaking, voice carrying across the space. The conversations gradually quieted as others turned to listen. Thermopylae, the officer said, raising a cup in salute, 300 against an empire. The Light Brigade, called another, lifting their cup in response. Into the Valley of Death rode the 600. Taffy 3 at Lake Gulf, a young engineer added. One by one, each crew member offered a name, a battle, a last stand. Some Vexthal recognized from the historical data the humans had shared. Others were unfamiliar. With each name, heads nodded in solemn acknowledgement. What is this ritual? Vexthal asked, fascinated. Remembrance, Hayes replied. We're recalling those who faced impossible odds before us. Some survived. Many didn't, but all of them changed the course of history through their actions. You derive comfort from stories of defeat. These weren't just defeats, Hayes corrected. They were defiant stands that mattered. Sometimes victory isn't about surviving. It's about making your sacrifice count. The impromptu ceremony concluded. Crew members returned to their duties with renewed focus. On the bridge, Captain Reed reviewed the final approach plan, his expression betraying no doubt about their chances. The inevitable dominance expects us to either flee or launch a conventional attack, he explained, indicating the massive Kravac flagship on the tactical display. We'll do neither. Instead, we'll transmit continuous updates about our approach vector on Confederation emergency channels. Broadcasting our position. Vexthal questioned. That seems counterproductive to survival. It would be, Reed agreed, if survival were our primary objective. The plan unfolded with brutal clarity. The Aurora would approach the Kravac flagship in what appeared to be a conventional attack, drawing the attention of the entire fleet. Meanwhile, the transmission would provide the Confederation forces with precise targeting data for a surprise assault, coordinated to the second with the Aurora's final approach. The Confederation fleet is still 18 hours away at maximum speed, Okafor pointed out. Then we'll have to survive for 18 hours, Reed replied simply. The Aurora emerged from its hiding place in the shadow of a rogue planetoid, engines flaring to life with deliberate visibility. The response was immediate. 30 Kravac vessels altering course to intercept. What followed was a masterclass in evasive tactics. The human ship wove through the enemy formation, never engaging directly, always staying just beyond effective weapons range, while leading the pursuit exactly where Reed wanted them to go. We're broadcasting on all frequencies now, communications reported. Confederation acknowledgement received. They've adjusted course and are accelerating beyond safety protocols. As hours passed, the Aurora sustained increasing damage. A glancing hit from a Kravac cruiser collapsed the port shield grid. A near miss from an antimatter torpedo scorched a 2-meter gash along the starboard hull. Environmental systems began failing deck by deck. Rear out power from non-essential systems, Reed ordered calmly as the bridge lighting flickered. Maintain transmission clarity at all costs. 16 hours into the engagement, the Aurora's situation had deteriorated from dangerous to critical. 3 decks had been sealed due to hull breaches. The main reactor operated at 142% of recommended capacity. 5 crew members had been killed, 17 injured. Yet still they fought, still they transmitted, still they led the Kravac fleet in their elaborate dance across the void. Confederation fleet will arrive in approximately 90 minutes, Okafor reported, her voice hoarse from hours of continuous duty. The inevitable dominance has moved to intercept us personally. The tactical display showed the massive Kravac flagship, a leviathan of weaponry and armor, breaking formation to engage directly. The move confirmed what Reed had suspected. Key Vash had become fixated on destroying the human vessel that had humiliated his forces. Perfect, Reed replied, his uniform singed from an electrical fire, a cut above his eye crusted with dried blood. Bring us about. Course 047 Mark 12. Full military thrust. The new heading would take them directly toward the Kravac flagship, not in evasion, but in deliberate confrontation. Captain, Okafor questioned. The Confederation fleet needs a clear shot at their command structure, Reed explained. We're going to give it to them. As the Aurora accelerated toward the inevitable dominance, its damaged systems groaning with the strain, Vexthal realized they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just tactical brilliance, but the kind of sacrifice that transcended species and culture. The Aurora, shields failing and hull integrity compromised, drove toward the heart of the enemy like a spear, drawing all attention to itself in preparation for the killing blow to come. Vexthal found Captain Reed not on the bridge celebrating their improbable victory, but in the medical bay. The human sat alone on a storage container, facing a row of 13 draped forms, crew members who hadn't survived the final confrontation with the inevitable dominance. The captain acknowledged Vexthal's presence with a slight nod, but didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of repair crews working to stabilize the Aurora's damaged systems. The flagship of the Kruvak fleet lay crippled in space, surrounded by Confederation vessels. The battle had ended 12 hours ago, yet Vexthal's 4 hearts still raced when they recalled those final moments. The Aurora, systems failing and hull breached in 17 locations, had driven directly toward the massive Kruvak vessel like a primitive projectile weapon. All enemy fire concentrated on the small human ship, exactly as Reed had planned. When the Confederation fleet emerged from hyperspace, precisely on schedule, and with weapons calibrated to the frequencies the Aurora had been transmitting, the Kruvak were caught completely unprepared. What had tipped the balance, however, wasn't the Confederation's arrival. It was the Aurora's final maneuver. Instead of targeting the inevitable dominance's command center or engines as expected, the human vessel had fired its remaining weapons at what appeared to be an insignificant tertiary communications array. Only later did intelligence confirm what Reed had somehow known, that Kvash, paranoid after years of ruling through fear, had installed his personal escape pod adjacent to that array, believing no enemy would target such an unimportant system. You knew where he would be, Vexthal finally said, breaking the silence in the medical bay. Reed looked up, his eyes showing the weight of command. We studied his previous engagements. Kvash never positioned himself where expected. His escape pod relocations followed a pattern, always near communication systems, never near obvious targets. You could have destroyed him. We could have, Reed agreed, glancing at the draped forms of his crew members. But that wasn't our mission. The Confederation's engineers now swarmed over the Aurora, studying its innovations with undisguised fascination. The vessel floated victorious but grievously wounded, its hull a patchwork of emergency repairs and exposed framework. Captain Reed, a communications officer, called from the doorway. The prisoner is requesting to meet you. Elder Enzarek has approved the meeting if you're willing. Reed stood slowly, straightening his scorched uniform. Where? The Confederation has arranged neutral ground on Outpost 7. Full security protocols in place. 3 hours later, Vexthal stood in the observation room adjacent to the meeting chamber, watching as Reed faced Kvash across a simple table. The Kruvak Supreme Commander, stripped of his ceremonial armor, but still imposing with his chitinous exoskeleton and multiple appendages, studied the human with compound eyes that revealed nothing. You are smaller than I expected, Kvash began, his words translated through a neutral system. Your species is physically unimpressive. We've heard that before, Reed replied evenly. Your vessel fought without honor, without glory, Kvash continued. You employed deception, trickery, psychological warfare. We employed whatever worked. Kvash's feeding mandibles clicked in what the translators identified as confusion. Yet when victory was within your grasp, you targeted my escape pod with precision weapons that disabled rather than destroyed. You denied yourself the glory of eliminating your enemy. Explain this contradiction. Reed leaned forward slightly. Humans learned long ago that how you end a war determines how long the peace lasts. We didn't come to exterminate the Kruvak. We came to ensure you never threaten us again. The Kruvak commander's posture shifted subtly. Your species is new to the galactic stage, yet you fight as if you have faced extinction many times. We have, Reed said simply, not from external enemies, but from ourselves. Every tactic we employed against you, we developed fighting other humans. Every innovation on our ship was born from necessity in our own conflicts. Kvash was silent for several moments, processing this information. And what happens now, human? Now the Confederation negotiates terms of surrender with your government. Diplomatic channels reopen. Trade resumes under new protocols. Life continues. And your vessel? Your Aurora? Will it leave the occupation forces? Reed shook his head. We're going home. Our part in this is done. As the Aurora prepared for its journey back to Earth, a dozen Confederation vessels escorted it, not as guards but as students, Their officers had been temporarily assigned to learn human tactics, to study the innovations that had turned the tide of a war the Confederation had been losing for decades. In Vexthel's final report to the Confederation Council, they included an unexpected recommendation. The humans call it deterrence, becoming so formidable that war becomes unthinkable. We have focused for millennia on how to win conflicts. The humans have taught us something far more valuable: how to prevent them. The report concluded with news that 17 species, including former Kravac subject worlds, had requested human military advisors. The galaxy's newest arrivals had proven themselves not just capable warriors, but perhaps the teachers the Confederation had needed all along. On the observation deck of the Aurora, as the vessel began its long journey home, Vexthel found Reed staring out at the stars. "Your crew tells me you've granted me permission to travel with you to Earth," Vexthel said. "I'm honored." Reed nodded. "You saw us at our best, and our worst. Seemed fitting you should see where we come from. What will your people say when you return? Will there be grand celebrations for the heroes who defeated the Kravac?" Reed's expression remained solemn. "There will be 13 funerals first, then debriefings, technical assessments, diplomatic sessions." He paused. "Eventually, yes, there will probably be ceremonies. Humans need those too. And then we build more ships," Reed said simply. "Not because we want to fight, but because we've learned the hard way that peace isn't the natural state of the universe. It has to be maintained, sometimes by diplomacy, sometimes by deterrence, sometimes by sacrifice." As the Aurora engaged its faster-than-light drive, leaving behind a changed galaxy, Vexthel understood at last what made humans different. It wasn't their technology or their tactics, impressive as those were. It was their relationship with conflict itself, intimate, reluctant, and tempered by the wisdom of a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times on the path to the stars. They didn't glorify war as the Kravac did, nor ritualize it like the Confederation. They simply acknowledged it as a terrible reality to be faced with clear eyes and firm resolve when all other options failed. And in doing so, they had brought something unexpected to a galaxy long accustomed to the slow rhythm of predictable conflicts: hope for a different way forward.